Okay, class, we got 3 learning targets today. First one is you're going to be able to evaluate absolute value expressions. Remember, expressions are, they do not have an equal sign. So this first one here on the left, there's a reminder here, absolute value is the distance of a number to 0, distance, and we're going to come back to that later. On the left side it says evaluate the following if m is equal to 4. I have the absolute value of m plus 6, and then I'm subtracting 14. So I'm just gonna plug in 4 in for my m, and then same thing as order of operations. Absolute value is the same thing as parentheses, so I have 4 plus 6, which is 10, minus 14. Now the absolute value of 10, again, absolute value is the distance from 0. So the distance of 10 to 0 is 10 minus 14. And keep in mind that distance is always used as a positive number. And then 10 minus 14 is, oh, I'm sorry, that's a miscalculation. That is negative 4. Okay, why don't you go ahead and try the second one on the right. This is going back to functions. I know this was something that we had a hard time with on our test, but I'm asking you to use the function on top and find f of 2. So here's my function. F of blank is equal to 23 minus the absolute value 3 minus 4 times blank. In these blanks, I'm going to fill in, since I'm looking for f of 2, that means everywhere I see a blank, I'm going to fill in f of 2. And then I see this group here of the absolute value, and 3 minus 4 times 2, I'm going to do the 4 times 2 first, which gives me 8, and then 3 minus 8 gives me negative 5. Now, the absolute value of negative 5 is just positive 5. So I have 23 minus 5, which gives me a final evaluation of 18. So that's just our first learning target. I can evaluate absolute value expressions. If you didn't really understand that, you can pause the video, rewind, and rewatch it. Let's move on to the second learning target. The second learning target is I can solve absolute value equations. So now you are looking for a value of x that will satisfy the equation. Take a moment, pause the video, and read through this paragraph right here, and underline and highlight anything that kind of sticks out. For me, 2 things kind of stuck out. We must consider both cases. Since we know absolute value is just distance, there are 2 numbers that can satisfy it. And then the second thing that stuck out to me was we got to make sure the absolute value is by itself before we split anything up. Now down here where it says the key concept, that kind of gives, again, just a different way of expressing absolute value. Let's move on to the examples. You can go ahead and read that, pause the video and read that if you like, but I'm going to move on to the examples. So, what we're saying is that absolute values should have 2 possible solutions. And so we have to first go through the rules. It said first isolate the absolute value. So in this case, the absolute value is by itself on the left side, right? So there's my left side. Now, once we have that, there are 2 situations. And one of them is, and you pretty much get rid of the absolute value here. One of them is equal to the positive 17, and the other is equal to the negative 17. So go ahead, take a moment, and solve those, and see what you get for the solutions. So you get x equals 12 and x equals negative 2. Now, why are there 2 solutions? If I plug both these numbers back in, you'll find that both of these can be solutions in absolute value. So I'm going to go ahead and plug in the 12. When I do that, you'll see that we get the absolute value of 12 plus 5, which is 17, and the absolute value of 17 is just 17. If I do that to the negative 22, we see that negative 22 plus 5 gives me negative 17, but the absolute value of negative 17 gives me also a positive 17. So, in this case, I do have two possible solutions that work. And how do you graph it? You just have to make sure the number lines are all even, a correct interval, and then just draw 2 points. So I went by the intervals of 4 here, and I'm just going to go ahead and plot the 2 points, negative 22 and 12. And this is just a graphical representation of my solutions based on the work that I did. So let's look at number 2 here. On the right, I have the absolute value of b minus 1 is equal to negative 3. Now I want you to take a moment and think about what we have to do next. Now, presumably, you probably did this based on the last problem. That's what we did, right? I told you to split it up. But I'm going to tell you this is a big fat X. This is no. I want you to, let me erase this real quick. And I really want you to take a look at this. Now, I think we're going to do a whole class discussion following this video, but why? What is it about this that won't allow me to continue on like how I did with the first example? And I'm just going to kind of leave you hanging like that, alright? Let's kind of scroll down to the next part, and I think I can explain a little bit more before I have you try things on your own. I think this first one, I want to do it together, but I think this first one will kind of help explain why we get two answers. So let's look at this. Absolute value of some number is equal to 8. The absolute value of something equals positive 8. So here, there are two possible answers. One of those answers is x can equal the positive 8, right, because that's 8 spaces away, or x can equal negative 8. And that makes sense, right? Because if I plug those back in, I get the absolute value of 8. And you just got to make sure you fill out the number line and plot them. There's my number line, intervals of 2, and so my solutions are negative 8 and positive 8. Okay? Go ahead and do numbers 2 and 3. Pause the video, do numbers 2 and 3, and then I'll help you out with number 4. So number 2, if you split it up, you should have gotten x is equal to 5 and x is equal to negative 11. And then I went by intervals of 2 on the number line and plotted those 2 points. Now number 3 is very similar to the one that I left you hanging on. And again, I want to talk about it as a class. If you did fill it out, should be nothing there. And again, I want you to think about why. Why is it that we cannot split this up? Alright? Let's look at number 4 together. I'll do this one together, and then you can do number 5. Now, the first thing that they said was that the absolute value had to be by itself. So if you look at this wall here, the absolute value right now is not by itself. You still have this plus 9 here, so you have to get rid of that plus 9. And so what do? You subtract 9 on both sides. And now we have the absolute value x plus 3 by itself is equal to 3. Now we can go ahead and split these two up. Go ahead and split those two up, set up the equation, solve for a solution, and then plot your points. And then actually go ahead and do number 5 on your own, and then check your answers. Pause your video. One thing I noticed for number 5, as I'm trying to get the absolute value by itself, I have 2 times the quantity, or the absolute value, x minus 6 is equal to 18. Now, naturally, I think what people would want to do is distribute this 2, but it's not a parentheses, it's very different. So, you'd have to actually divide both sides by 2 to get rid of it, since 2 times the absolute value, and then end up with the absolute value of x minus 6 is equal to 9. And then you can go ahead and split that equation up and solve it. Go ahead and solve, check your answers, and check the number line. There you go, negative 3 and 15. The next video is going to be on Canvas again. I just have to make sure that this is not longer than 10 minutes.